The other challenge I think that one can have with AI-based approaches to pricing is the sort of black box nature. And generative AI gives something of a path forward for that.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Jennings Executive Search. I had a great conversation with John Jennings about the skills needed in different pricing roles. He and I think a lot alike. If you're looking for a new pricing role, or if you're trying to hire just the right pricing person, I strongly suggest you reach out to Jennings Executive Search. They specialize in placing pricing people. Say that 3 times fast. Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the recursive relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and our guest today is once again Stephen Forth. Here are 3 things you want to know about Stephen before we start. He is the CEO of Ibbaka. He has been a frequent guest on the podcast. We love having him on. And he is possibly the world's biggest expert on the intersection of pricing and AI. And by big, I don't mean size. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Mark.
I was just going to say, today we're going to talk about PPS. You just got back from PPS. I'll try to move this one forward in the list so we can get it released quickly. But what did you see? What did you hear? What's going on?
So the first thing I want to note about PPS is that people are listening to Mark Stiving's podcasts.
Woohoo!
So this is a very good thing. And so I want to just give you a shout out. I think you're doing a great job getting people with real expertise on the podcasts and attracting the right audience. I would say that, probably 10 people came up to me and said, "Oh, yes, aren't you the guy who does podcasts with Mark Stiving?" And so I thought that's a great sign.
Nice. I appreciate that. And, I have to say, it's typically the guests that do all this. All I do is ask questions that I'm curious about and then share my opinion about what's going on. But it's getting smart people like you on that make all the difference in the podcast, because I could never do this without you.
I think that and this sort of will intersect with the rest of our conversation today. The true test of an intelligent person is whether they can ask good questions. Lots of us have opinions and can come up with answers, but it's really asking good questions that makes the difference. And one of the things we're going to be talking about today and then later in May is the intersection of AI, generative AI, innovation, and pricing. And when you really think about it, what really makes generative AI work is the quality of the questions that you can ask it. Now, I assure you, though, that in this case, this is actually me you're talking to, not my avatar. Although I challenge you to be able to prove that. But anyway, coming back to the Professional Pricing Society. So, as you know, Mark, the Professional Pricing Society has 3 events each year, sometimes 4. They have one on the eastish coast of the United States. Chicago, I guess, counts as the East Coast. I'm not sure that people in Chicago think that. Then they have one further west. This year, it's going to be in Las Vegas. And then towards the end of the year, they have an event in Europe, and sometimes they have an event in Singapore. But this is really the big one. I think the spring conference is the anchor for the PPS schedule. So it's if people are going to attend one, the one coming up in Las Vegas, I'm sure will be an excellent event. But the Chicago one is the key, I think. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say that Vegas is a hop, skip, and a jump for me from Reno. So I'm probably going to head down to Vegas and go to that one. Just much easier travel for me. But I'm glad you made it to Chicago.
I think it's easy for just about everyone to get to Las Vegas. It's a well-connected city.
Yes.
So a few things that I noticed about this event. So one thing that I was delighted to see is that the bookstore is back. So the Professional Pricing Society conference used to have a bookstore, and the bookstore was back for this conference, and it was great to see just the number of books that are being published in the area, and the interest. There were a lot of people coming by and buying books. You should see a spike in the sales of your own titles.
Did they have some of my books there?
They did, yes.
Nice. So they had my books at the last event I was at, which I couldn't tell you when it was. It was one of the events last year I went to, and the bookstore was there, but I can't say that it was well organized at the time. Maybe it was the first time they'd brought it back after having it gone for a while, and hopefully it was well organized this time.
Yeah, I think they could perhaps do a bit more work on thematic organization, but it's small enough that you can sort of walk around. They probably had about 100 different titles. It's sort of manageable.
Nice.
So, it was perhaps not incredibly well thematically organized, but it didn't need to be, because you could take in all of the titles as in a short period of time. So I was really happy to see the bookstore back. I guess they've had it. This was not the first event that it was back at then, but it was the first event that I've been at that they had it. So
don't mention my books because I don't really care. But did any books jump out at you that were there? What's the latest and greatest that they were pushing, or that looked like, hey, this is the one that everybody should be reading right now?
Well, it wasn't actually at the bookstore because BCG was giving it away for free. But the what's it called? The BCG books. I've got a copy. You'd think I would have memorized this. Just a second.
This is old age memory.
Game changer. For some reason, I had the word power shift in my head, but it's game changer.
Oh, game changer. Yeah. So they presented that last PPS. They didn't give the book away. They presented the presentation, and I went out and bought the book. It was good.
I think it's an excellent book. In some ways it's quite original in the way that it provides a structural analysis of the different ways that the pricing game can be played, and suggests what drives you from one game, whether it's a value game or pure competition or cost plus based game, what drives you from one game to the other. And one of the keynotes was by one of the authors, by Arnab Sinha. And so that was good. So that was the book, I think, that drew a lot of attention.
Nice. We had both Arnab and JMI on the podcast a few weeks ago or months ago. I'm not great with time, so
yeah. So I think that was the book that really drew my attention. I picked up a good half dozen books to sort of keep the luggage nice and solid on my way back. Augusta Machon, who I think has been on your podcasts,
yep.
He said that he bought he had bought 9, and then we both went and bought another book together. So we also went and bought the second edition of Jim Vaughn's book. So this is out in second edition now. Stop Pricing in Blindfold: Big Data and Pricing Science. Which is it needed an update because things have changed quite a bit over the last few years. And Jim has some sensible things to say. So, I think that was great as well.
Nice. So I got to ask you a question that's not pricing related for a second. Why do you still read physical books?
Because I spend enough time looking at screens.
Oh, I like the idea that I have all my books with me all the time.
Yeah, I've tried virtually every e-reader known and have been using them since I lived in Japan when they first started to come out. So that's coming close to 40 years ago. So I have a huge collection of e-readers and devices that you can read books on. But I spend 8+ hours a day staring at an electronic screen of one form or another. I'm just glad to have some form of respite from it.
Nice. Maybe I'll pick up a real book one of these days and see what it feels like. Okay.
There are also there are quite a few books where the form factor does not suit a phone or a Kobo or a Kindle or any of those other readers. So, if you have a large format book with a lot of detailed technical drawings in it, paper is still a pretty good medium.
Okay. I'll try it. Okay. Back to PPS.
So the other thing that I thought was quite interesting was that there were some very good talks on sustainability and pricing. So as you know, this is a theme that Stefan Liozu has been deeply engaged in for the past couple of years. And there have been lots of different talks and approaches to it. But I thought at this year's event, the themes were sort of coming together and coalescing. And one of the most interesting talks that I went to was actually, it was Friday morning, and it was by Nick Nalepa from Michelin. Gave a really compelling talk, I thought, on price. How do you price sustainability so that price helps you reinforce the value? And let's face it, in B2B anyway, feel good or feel good metrics or social responsibility, none of those things are really going to get people to buy and pay for sustainable solutions. I don't think. It has to be tied to value, and you have to be able to show that your green solution provides more value than the competing solutions. And I think that message is coming together, and that the sustainable solutions themselves are maturing to a point where they actually provide more compelling value. And that's a really important shift.
Can you provide an example?
Sure. I'm going to, out of respect to Nick, I'm actually going to use Michelin as my first example. So, Michelin, as we know, makes tires and systems for using tires. So if you design those tires so that the trucks, and let's face it, most of the commercial uses are for trucks or airplanes, that the trucks run more efficiently, they have less impact on the environment. If they have less wear, they are more efficient to operate, but also they have less impact on the environment. And if you have squeezed efficiencies out of your supply chain so that it is more sustainable, it's also more energy efficient, and it uses more recycling, and that makes it actually a more efficient supply chain as well. So, the efficiency metrics can get translated into both cost savings and revenue generation metrics, and the having a more efficient and sustainable supply chain gives you more resilience and lowers your costs. So that would be an example.
I'm going to be a huge naysayer here. By the way, love the example. And here's what I just heard you say. We're not pricing for sustainability. We're designing sustainability into the product attributes that we're delivering, and therefore we can price for the value that we're delivering.
Yeah, that's not being a naysayer. Yeah, that's exactly what I said, or what I meant. And that's how it's got to be.
Yeah, I agree completely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Or
Absolutely.
to take another example, so as you know, Ibbaka believes in a model-driven approach to pricing. And at its heart, what Ibbaka is a bunch of model builders and software to build models, and increasingly AIs to build models and optimize models. The models that we build, so we build a value model, we build a pricing model. These days, we are increasingly building cost models, but we also build sustainability models. And it was actually our customers that led us to do that. And the company I'm going to give an example is actually one of the companies that early on said, part of our selling proposition is our impact on the environment. And so we need to quantify the environmental impact of our solution and not just the economic value of our solution. So this company, it's called HydroPoint. And what HydroPoint does is it creates the hybrid Internet of Things systems that are used to improve water management. And so water management at large facilities, whether it's a Walmart store or a large building complex or, Google's campus and so on. So there's both a value model and a sustainability model, and of course a pricing model, because you still have to get to pricing. And these three models share variables. So by putting in the same data, you can output an estimate of the value, an estimate of the environmental impact. And those two things can also be used to generate the price. So I think the secret here, at least from a pricing and modeling approach, is to find those variables that get used across the different models. And by having the same variable used in different models, you can pull sustainability together with value, together with pricing. Did that make sense?
It did, but because I love arguing with you, I'm going to push back on that one too, if you don't mind. But by the way, I have no qualms about what you just said, but I could argue that sustainability in their world is simply value. And we could have tucked sustainability into the value model and said, this is one of our value drivers. And so we've got 7 other value drivers along with sustainability. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. So I don't know that it needed to be something different, but I think the totally okay that it is. That
for Ibbaka, a value model spits out a dollar figure. So for Ibbaka, the value model is calculating a dollar value, whereas the sustainability model is calculating a reduction in water consumption and a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, so what that says to me is that you weren't able to tie a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions back to revenue to the company, even though the company knows that is important to their revenue. Your model didn't tie it back.
No, the model does tie it back, but the HydroPoint's customers also need to report on their greenhouse gas emissions. So it's part of their public reporting. So there's one community out there who doesn't care about the economic value, they care about the environmental impact.
Right. And so this is a KPI that we're tracking, and I don't mean to demean it at all, but I just, it's like, in my world, it's all about value. And
sometimes perhaps Ibbaka takes too narrow a view of value, because although we do have ways of framing emotional and other types and community value, at the end of the day, for pricing purposes, we are primarily focused on the dollars. And having the other thing separate but connected allows us to think more clearly about the two.
Yep. Understood. Okay. Back to PPS. And I don't want to run out of time, because I want to know how your presentation went. Was there something else before that you want to talk about?
Well, I think just in general, there is a lot of interest in AI. So all of the big pricing vendors, the Zilliants, the Pros, Vendavo, PriceFX, all of them have started to change how they talk about AI. So let's face it, those companies are all sort of native AI companies, but it's an older generation of AI. And, their approach to AI is relevant to when you have a large number of SKUs and a large number of transactions. They've always struggled, I believe, with the more typical B2B case where you have a relatively small number of SKUs, unless you're a distributor, and where you have tens to thousands of transactions, not hundreds of thousands to millions.
Right.
And I believe going around and talking to the people at the different technology companies, that they have started to really interact with AI in new ways. And this is great. This is a breath of fresh air within the industry.
So we started this conversation off with the question is the important part. What question did you ask? Or what was the important question that you asked the software vendors to understand what they're doing different with AI?
Well, I didn't even really need to ask the question because they were so eager to tell us. And I think, I think that they were probably aware that there was a certain level of frustration in the industry with what they'd been doing and the sort of black box nature of it. Just two quick stories from previous PPS conferences. One of the major vendors was up on the stage telling us that everybody in B2B was going to move to dynamic pricing. And you better get on board, preferably with their solution, because dynamic pricing was going to take over B2B. So I naively got up and asked the questions as to how they were pricing their own solution using dynamic pricing. And of course, they're not.
Of course.
But so, I think that there has, been sort of a bit of ennui and, just a feeling that, nothing new is really happening. And then the other problem or challenge, I think, that one can have with AI-based approaches to pricing is the sort of black box nature. So imagine you're a salesperson and the AI has suggested a price to you and you're talking to a customer. The customer goes, oh no, I think that price is too high. Is the salesperson going to say, well, our software told us that that's what you should be willing to pay? The buyer's going to say, what do I care what your software thinks I should be willing to pay? The black box nature of those calculations wasn't really helping anybody. And generative AI gives something of a path forward, I think, for that. So having said that, I didn't really need to ask them. They were eager to tell. Sometimes the problem was to get them to be quiet for a moment, which is good. Now, I wouldn't say every booth was well staffed with people that were deeply familiar with what they were doing, but there were at least two or three people at all of the major vendors' booths that were very well informed, had thought deeply about the issues, and had, I thought, intelligent and useful things to say. So Las Vegas should be really interesting. The solution should be that much further along by then. Hopefully there will be more demos and more ways to interact with the software by then.
Yeah. So you didn't answer the question. What's new? What are they doing with generative AI that makes it interesting and fun?
Yeah. Well, I think that probably most of this set of people are more at the exploration stage. So I am going to tell you about one of the companies we're going to want to discuss when we have our webinar on May 23rd. So part of the promise of AI, and this is a theme that Ibbaka had identified early on in its research, was the ability of AIs to dynamically configure software, not to dynamically give you a price, but to run a dynamic configuration so that your conversation with the AI would give a configuration of it, would configure the software. And I had thought that for most practical purposes, this was 18 to 36 months out. But as we were doing our research, we came across a company called Totogi. And what Totogi does is it makes a BSS solution. So BSSs are the layer of software that operate mobile networks. Now, these are large, complex pieces of software, normally with a lot of configuration or customization. And 3 years ago, it would probably take you a year and a half to more than 2 years to get one configured and get your system out there. Over the past year, there have been a number of vendors that have come up with cloud-based, highly modular, highly configurable solutions that really dramatically shrink that time down to anywhere, optimistically 2 months, but reliably four to 5 months. So that was a huge step forward, right? From say 2 years to 4 months. That's a big difference. Totogi, using generative AI, guess how long it takes them to configure a system?
A minute.
Yeah, less than that. So this is a dramatic change. And think about this now for a moment from a pricing perspective. If systems that used to take months to configure, or at least days, can now be configured in minutes, that is a fundamental game changer. And it will change how we need to think about pricing such systems as well, because now the pricing has to be as configurable and as, I hate to use the word dynamic, how about responsive? As responsive as the configuration system. And I think that this opens a path towards configuring to AI-driven, value-based configuration.
So let me make sure I understand. When you use the word configuration, what I heard in my head was implementation, right? So when I had a real pricing job out at Maxim, we bought Model N software, and it took us months, if not years, to figure out what setting do we want to do with this, and how do we get this data into this place, and right. And so what I'm hearing you say is that goes from that year down to a minute. Is that the piece that we're talking about? Because I got to say that's huge if that is.
That is the destination that we are making real progress towards. Yes.
Wow. So to me, the challenge I would see, and of course, because I'm not as insightful as you are, the challenge I would see is every company is different. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the reason we do different pricing for every company. It's because every company is different.
I would go further than that. I would say that every company's customers, for every company, each of their customers are different. So things that we knew were sort of interesting ideas theoretically 2 years ago or even a year ago are now coming into the realm of possibility. So that means, I'm going to give Ibbaka as an example here. So Ibbaka builds value models. At essence, and turns them into pricing models and value stories and other things. Now, it takes us, best case, 2 weeks to build a value model. And it can take much longer if it's complex and our customer doesn't understand its customers. So it can take several months. And it takes the dedicated effort of a lot of smart people with smart tools. Now, we were speaking to one large European company about a year ago, and they said, look, I get it. I understand we should have value models. I understand that value-based pricing is what we should be doing. To do what you're suggesting, we would need roughly 1,000 value models. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, Ibbaka cannot build us 1,000 value models on our time scale. Not only can Ibbaka not do this, nobody can do it, And probably if you put all the capability of all the pricing people in the industry to work on this, they still couldn't do it in a reasonable time frame. And even if they did, they would have changed by the time you'd built all those value models. So this value modeling approach, nice in theory, does not work at scale. And I couldn't disagree with the guy, right? If he came to us and said, okay, let's go. I want 1,000 value models. When can I have them? Well, I probably, after you woke me up because I'd fainted and fallen to the floor, said, well, let me get back to you on that. And preferably let me get back to you on that in 6 months. So imagine now that you can build an AI that if you have the right prompts and you've trained it properly, and you need to do a bunch of stuff, but let's just say that I have a generative AI that can build a credible value model in seconds. So that in itself is a game changer. But now, because building a value model is just the first step, right? You have to create an instance of the value model for every customer, which also takes time. Now, that time goes down from 2 weeks to 2 months to 20 minutes to 2 hours, but it's still a significant amount of time. Now you can do that in seconds at higher quality. That certainly changes how you think about using value and in your business. But then it also allows you to explore a lot more. So in the past, you might have explored 2 or 3, maybe 5 of the possible models. And when you're configuring, you explore again 2 or 3 of the possible configurations. Now, because you can configure so much more quickly, you can explore the different opportunities much more quickly, and you can come up with solutions that are both very specific to that customer and its customers, and that can change rapidly over time. So it leads to much more agile and flexible organizations that can really organize themselves around delivering value. And that change will have a huge impact on how we think about pricing.
Okay, you've got me thinking. I mean, I have lots of pushbacks, but you've got me thinking. And the thing is, we're running out of time, so we're going to have to wrap it up.
We'll be continuing this conversation at our webinar, where we'll be focused just on these questions, right? What does the new generation of generative AIs, how are people developing with it, and how are they going to price what they're developing?
It will be exciting. There is no doubt. And so you didn't answer this question. And so see if you can do this succinctly because we don't have any time. How did your presentation go?
Well, that's always hard for the person giving the presentation to answer. I will say that I have received probably 15 or 20 questions about it over the last 3 days. So if it generates questions, I think it went well.
Nice. People actually paid attention and wanted to know more. So that was good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Stephen, as always, thank you very much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
The best way is to just email me, Stephen, Steven, at Ibbaka.com. And I am very easy to find on LinkedIn, Stephen with the V, F-O-R-T-H.
Excellent. And finally, for our listeners, if you have any questions or comments about the podcast or pricing in general, but not AI, please email me, Mark at impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact. Thanks again to Jennings Executive Search for sponsoring our podcast. If you're looking to hire someone in pricing, I suggest you contact someone who knows pricing people. Contact Jennings Executive Search.